It's late now, the kind of late where even the street outside goes quiet and you can hear the refrigerator hum from 2 rooms away. I've been sitting here a long time already. Sometimes I do that. Just sit. Let the dark hold still around me and don't try to fill it up with anything. I don't turn on the television anymore the way I used to. Used to leave it on for the noise. Didn't want to hear myself think. But I'm old now, and I've made my peace with the thinking. Most of it I've made peace with. There's a glass of water on the table here that I poured a while ago and haven't touched. That's how these nights go sometimes. You reach for something, and then you don't quite do it. You sit there with the intention and let the intention be enough. I want to tell you something. I want to tell it right and slow, the way it actually happened, the way it actually felt, not the clean version I told myself for years, the version that let me sleep, but the real one, the one that comes back to me on nights like this when the house is quiet and I can't pretend I don't know who I am and what I did and what I didn't do and what was done to me and how it all tangled together into something I've been carrying for decades now. I'm going to try to say it all. I was 53 years old when it happened. I want you to understand what 53 felt like in my body at that time. I wasn't an old man then, not the way I'm an old man now. I still had something strong in me, still woke up with purpose. I worked concrete, had been working concrete most of my adult life, first on other men's crews and then eventually with my own. Small operation, but it was mine. 3 men who trusted me. Work boots I bought new every 2 years, hands that knew what they were doing. I had come to that house, Vera's house, our house by then. We'd been together almost 7 years. I had come to that marriage late, 50 years, old when we married, or nearly. I had been careful about love for a long time before that. Not cold, not closed, but careful. I'd watched other men I knew get torn up, and I'd watched myself get torn up once before, a long time ago. A woman named Celestine, who I won't linger on tonight because that's a different grief, and I don't have the energy for all of them. Vera was something else. She laughed easy, and she meant it. She was not a woman who laughed to fill the air. She laughed because something was genuinely funny to her, and when it stopped being funny, she stopped laughing, and that was honest, and I respected that about her. She was precise. She cooked the way she did everything, with intention. Nothing accidental about Vera. Even her kindness was deliberate. She had 2 daughters from before. Marcus, their father, had been gone for a long time, left when the girls were small. I never knew the full story because Vera didn't give me the full story, and I respected that too. I didn't push. I figured she'd tell me when she wanted to, and if she didn't want to, then that was hers to hold. The older one, Diane, she was living up in Cleveland by the time Vera and I got serious. Married young, had a boy already. Diane I knew at a distance. Polite. Careful with me the way people are when they're not sure how to feel. I didn't take it personally. I'd learned not to take those things personally. The younger one was Keisha. Keisha was 19 when I married her mother. Dark like her mother, sharp eyes, quick with everything she said, smart in the particular way that can cut if it wants to. She'd been accepted to a state university down in Columbus for the fall and was spending that summer at home, last summer before everything changed for her. And I could feel her bristling at me already then, but I told myself it was just the age, just the natural friction of a girl who'd grown up in one arrangement having to adjust to a new one. I tried not to take up too much space. I didn't come in giving orders. I didn't try to be her father. I made that very clear to myself from the start. You are not trying to replace anything. You are just a man who loves her mother. That's all you need to be. But I paid for things. I want to say that plainly, because it matters for what comes later. I paid for the college application fees. I helped Vera with tuition deposits. When Keisha needed a car to get back and forth from school first semester, used car, nothing fancy, a little Honda that was clean and reliable. It was me that made that happen. Not because I wanted credit, not because I was keeping score, because Vera was working as a home health aide at the time and money was tight and I had a little more room, and because it seemed like the right thing to do for a young woman who was trying to make something of herself. I believed in doing the right thing, without announcement. My mother raised me that way. My mother. She died when I was 41, 12 years before that dinner. I still hear her voice sometimes, not in a haunted way, just in the way certain voices never quite leave you. She used to say that a man's dignity is the one thing he carries with him from birth to burial that nobody gave him, and nobody can take from him, but he can give it away. She said that, give it away by staying quiet when he ought to speak, or by speaking when he ought to hold still. She had a whole philosophy about it, a whole quiet philosophy she never wrote down, just lived. I think about that a lot now, whether I gave mine away that night, whether what I did the next morning was taking it back or just making sure no one could see it was gone. The dinner was in November, late November. There was a pie Vera had made, sweet potato, the kind she made every Thanksgiving season. Diane had come down from Cleveland with her husband, Gerald. Quiet man, Gerald, worked at a plant, didn't say much but was always decent to me. And her little boy, Marcus Jr., who was 7 or 8 then and only cared about whether there was dessert. And Keisha was home from school for the holiday. First time I'd seen her since September. She'd grown into herself a little more. The university had given her something, some confidence, or something that looked like confidence, a new way of moving through a room. Good, I thought. That's good. That's what's supposed to happen. We sat down. It was a good table. Vera had done it right, the way she always did. The good dishes, the tablecloth her mother had left her, the candles she only took out on occasions. I remember the candle light. I've gone back to that candle light many times, the way it made everyone's face soft. There was a moment, just before anyone said anything, when I looked around that table and felt genuinely happy. Not the big, loud kind, the small, settled kind that you almost don't recognize until later when it's gone. We ate. Gerald talked about the plant. Diane talked about Marcus Jr.'s school. Vera kept getting up to bring things from the kitchen, and I kept telling her to sit down, and she kept ignoring me, and that was its own kind of love, her ignoring me like that. Keisha was quiet at first, on her phone a little. Then she put the phone down and started talking about school, about a professor she liked, about something that had happened in her dormitory that she found funny. I listened. I asked her something. I don't remember what. Something small, something to show I was listening. She said something back, offhand, a little sharp, the way she sometimes got. I don't even remember exactly what it was, some comment about the food, maybe, or about something I'd said, a little dismissive, the kind of thing that lands on you, and you can't say quite why it stings, but it does. I said something in response. I corrected her on something. Not harshly. I want to be honest about that. I wasn't harsh. I spoke the way I spoke to people I was responsible for, the way I'd speak to one of my workers when they got something wrong. Direct, clear, not unkind. And that's when Vera said it. She was passing the rolls or reaching for something, some small motion of the hand, and she said it without even fully looking at me. She said, almost under her breath, but not quiet enough, "She's not your daughter. Don't correct her." The table went quiet in that specific way that means everyone heard. I sat there. I want to sit in that moment with you for a second, because I need you to feel what that felt like. 53 years old. My hands on that good tablecloth. 7 years I'd been in that woman's life. 7 years of showing up, of paying for things I hadn't fathered and not keeping score about it. 7 years of being careful with those girls, careful not to overstep, careful to give Vera whatever room she needed to still feel like the full authority in her own home. 7 years of concrete at 5 in the morning so that house had heat in it, and that table had food on it, and that girl at the other end of it had a Honda in good working order sitting in a university parking lot in Columbus. She's not your daughter. Don't correct her. Keisha looked down at her plate. She didn't look triumphant. She looked something else. I don't know. Maybe a little scared. Maybe a little something she didn't expect. Diane looked at her husband. Gerald looked at his food. Little Marcus Jr. asked if there was more of the corn casserole. Children have that gift, I think. The gift of needing things right at the moment when everyone else is drowning. I didn't say anything. That's the part I've turned over the most, that I didn't say anything. That I looked at Vera, and I saw her looking at her plate now too. Not at me, not at Keisha, just at her plate. And I looked at the candles, and I said nothing. I reached for my water glass. I took a slow drink. I set it back down. And then I asked Gerald something about the plant, and the conversation started up again, thin and careful at first, and then gradually less careful, the way conversations do when people agree without speaking to let something go. We had pie. I helped clear the table. I was polite to Diane and Gerald when they left. I hugged little Marcus Jr. I was civil to Keisha, who went upstairs quickly with her bag over one shoulder and didn't look back. That night, Vera and I washed dishes side by side, and she didn't say anything about it, and I didn't say anything about it, and we went to bed, and she fell asleep, and I didn't. I lay there in the dark, and I was very, very still. I have thought so many times about what I should have said at that table, what the right words would have been. Not loud words, not angry words, but true ones. Something that would have made clear, without theatrics, who I was and what I had given, and what I expected in return, which was not very much, which was really just basic human respect, the kind you'd give a decent stranger on the street. I have rehearsed those words so many times, they've worn grooves in me. I've said them to the ceiling. I've said them on the highway driving alone. I've said them to my reflection in the bathroom at 3 in the morning. But I never said them to her. My father didn't say much either. That's not an excuse. I'm not offering it as an excuse. But you think about those things when you're this old. You think about the patterns you were handed before you were old enough to know you were being handed them. My father was a man who worked and provided and kept his counsel. He showed love through presence and labor, and by not leaving, which I know sounds like the lowest possible standard, but in the world he came from, in the time he came from, it was not nothing. He died before I got old enough to ask him the real questions about whether he ever wanted to say more, whether there was a whole other life going on inside him that none of us ever got to know. I think there probably was. I think most men of his generation were walking around with entire interior countries that nobody ever visited. I didn't want to be that. I thought I wasn't that. I thought I was different, more open, more willing. But then I sat at that table, and something in me went somewhere very old and very quiet, and I stayed silent the way he would have stayed silent, and I've never fully forgiven myself for it. Not because the silence was wrong, necessarily. Not because speaking would have fixed everything or anything, but because the silence I chose wasn't the dignified kind. It wasn't the strong kind. It was the kind that comes from not knowing what you're worth and not wanting to find out in public. Vera and I never talked about it. Not that night, not the next day, not ever. I want you to sit with that too. 7 more years we were together after that. I'll get to that. And we never once spoke about what happened at that table. I don't know if she even remembered it the way I remember it. I don't know if it sat in her the same way. Maybe to her, it was just a small thing, said in a thoughtless moment. Maybe she regretted it 2 minutes later. Maybe she didn't. I genuinely do not know. And now I never will, because Vera has been dead 4 years, and you can't ask things of the dead. That's something they don't tell you about loss. That there are questions that were always going to go unanswered, and you just didn't know it yet. The morning after the dinner was a Saturday. Cold. I remember the cold specifically, the kind that feels like metal against your face when you step outside. I was up at 5 the way I always was, made coffee the way I always did, standing in the kitchen, watching the backyard go from black to grey through the window. I sat with my coffee for a long time. And then I drove to the bank. I want to say something about those hours before I drove to the bank. I want to say that I was calm. Not the numbness kind of calm, not the shock kind. I'd slept on it. I'd been awake through most of it. And by the time the sun was coming up, I had come to a clear and deliberate place inside myself. Not angry, not vengeful. Something more like a man who has looked very carefully at a situation and seen it accurately for the first time. What I had given freely. I want to say that clearly. I had not given those things as leverage, had not given them expecting that they could be taken back. I had given them because they needed to be given, and because I was the one who could give them, and because I loved Vera and wanted her daughters to thrive. But she's not your daughter. Those words had accomplished something that Vera probably hadn't intended. They had clarified the arrangement. They had drawn a line and said, here is the boundary of your belonging. Here is the edge of this family. You are on one side of it. We are on the other. All right. I took the car off my insurance that Saturday morning. I made a phone call Monday morning to the university and removed my name from the payment arrangement I'd set up. I called my bank and moved back certain accounts that had been pooled. I did it all quietly. No announcement, no confrontation, no note. I didn't pack a bag. I didn't leave. I came home that evening and had supper with Vera and said nothing about any of it. I have questioned myself about that so many times. Whether I was right, whether I was vindictive, whether a bigger man would have just let it go, just absorbed it, just kept giving. There are days when I think I was small, petty in a quiet way, which is its own kind of pettiness. And then there are days when I think, no, a man has to know what he is and what he is not, has to know where the line is. You cannot keep building a house that the other person doesn't recognize as yours. Keisha found out when she went back to Columbus, when she went to the parking lot and the car was gone, when she called her mother and her mother called me. That was a hard conversation. Vera's voice had something in it I hadn't heard before. Not anger, exactly. more like a kind of cold disbelief. She said, "You took her car." And I said, "I did." And she said, "You took your name off the school payments." And I said, "I did." She was quiet for a long time, and then she said, "Why?" And I said, "You told me she wasn't mine. I took you at your word." Vera hung up. We didn't speak for 3 days. Those 3 days were some of the longest of my life. I went to work. I came home. I ate food I made myself. I sat in this same kind of late-night quiet and thought about who I was and what I'd built and what I was willing to lose. Because I knew by then that I might lose it all, that she might not forgive me, that Keisha might not forgive me, that this might be the end of everything I'd built in that house over those 7 years. And I sat with that, let it be real in me, and I decided I could live with it. That might sound like strength. I'm not sure it was. I think there was some damage in me too, some old wound that had been waiting to justify its own scar, and maybe I let it. Maybe a man without that damage would have found another way through. I don't know. I am what I am, and I was what I was, and that morning I did what I did, and I can't take it back. Vera came back. Not right away, but she came back. She asked me to sit down with her at the kitchen table. Not that dining room table, never that one. I think we both understood, without saying, so that something had happened at that table that we weren't ready to sit at again. And she said that she had been wrong to say what she said the way she said it, in public, in front of everyone. She didn't say she was wrong about the thing itself, about whether Keisha was mine to correct. Just about the way she said it, the public way, the diminishing way. I said I heard her. She said she needed me to understand that Keisha was still her daughter and that her daughters came first, always. That was just the truth of it, and she needed to know I understood that. I said I understood it. She said, "So what do we do?" And I said, "I don't know, Vera. I want you to hear how much was in those 3 words. I don't know, Vera. I meant them from the bottom of me. Because I didn't know. I didn't know if we could put something back that had shown itself to be broken. I didn't know if I should restore what I'd taken away. I didn't know if we could go on from there or if we were already finished and just hadn't said it out loud yet. We went on. That was the decision we made, without fully making it. We just kept going, kept being in the house together, kept doing the small daily things that constitute a life shared. And gradually the acute pain of it became chronic, and the chronic pain became something like background noise, the way a lot of things do. I never fully restored the arrangements. I want to say that plainly. Keisha eventually got back on her feet. Her aunt on her father's side helped with the car situation, I heard through Vera. She stayed in school. She finished. She's a woman in her mid-30s now, I think, doing something with computers, got a little girl of her own. I know all that through Vera, from before Vera got sick. We never spoke again, Keisha and I. Not one word after that Thanksgiving. I saw her once at Christmas, maybe 3 years later, and we were in the same room for 2 hours, and we managed it the way you manage something unspoken. Careful movements, no eye contact that lingered, no acknowledgement of the thing that lived between us. She never thanked me for what I'd given before it was taken away. I never expected her to. But sometimes I wonder if she ever thought about it. If she ever sat 20 years later, 30 years later, and thought about a man who paid her application fees and put her in a reliable car, and then one day disappeared from those roles without a word. Whether she understood it, whether she understood that it wasn't cruelty, whether she knows that I genuinely wanted things to go well for her. I hope she knows that. I hope she knows. There is something I haven't said yet about Vera and me that I want to try to say now, because without it, you don't fully have the picture. We had an argument, maybe 8 months before the dinner. One of those arguments that goes into places neither person planned on going. We were talking about money, about whose money was whose, about the way things were structured between us, and somewhere in it she said something to the effect that she had always managed on her own, and she knew how to manage on her own, and she didn't need anyone to manage things for her. I remember being hurt by that in a way I couldn't articulate clearly at the time, because it wasn't untrue. She had managed on her own. For a long time, through difficulties I could only partially imagine, she had managed on her own and done it with grace. But she was saying it, in that particular moment, as a shield, as a way of making herself not needy, not beholden, not grateful, as a way of making my contribution something she could theoretically do without. I said something like, "Then why are we doing this together at all?" which was more honest than I meant to be in the heat of it. And she went quiet, and the argument dissolved into that quietness, and we didn't follow it into the deep water it was pointing toward. 8 months later, at the table, she said, "She's not your daughter." I think those two things were connected. I think there was something in Vera that needed to maintain a certain separateness, a certain sovereignty over her own story and her daughter's story. And I had been so careful for so long not to threaten that sovereignty that when I finally did, just by correcting Keisha about some small thing at a dinner table, she drew the line reflexively, without thought, drew it as clearly as she could in the fewest possible words. She was protecting something. I understand that now in a way I couldn't then. Protecting her daughters from the instability of a man who might leave, the way the other man had left. Protecting herself from the vulnerability of having let someone in. Protecting the story she'd told herself about her own strength, which was a real strength, but which also carried inside it the wound of having had to be strong alone for too long. I understand it. Understanding it didn't make it hurt less. Understanding why someone cuts you doesn't close the cut. What I wish, and this is the wishing that does the most damage, the retroactive kind, what I wish is that we had been braver with each other sooner, that we had had the real conversation about all of this before it erupted at the table, that I had said to her, maybe in the first year, maybe even in the middle of that argument about money, I need you to tell me what I am in this house, not because I need the title or the rank, but because I need to know how to be here. I need to know if I'm building something that you'll let be built, or if I'm going to be out in the cold one day for reasons I never saw coming. She might have answered that honestly. She was capable of it. She could be brutally honest when she decided to be. She might have said, "I don't fully trust this. I'm scared. I've been hurt. I need more time." And I could have worked with that. I could have understood that. Or she might have answered the way she answered most uncomfortable questions, by not quite answering, by going sideways, by giving me something that sounded like an answer, but wasn't. And I could have worked with that too, or at least I would have known where I stood. Instead, we went 7 years doing what people do when they're afraid to know the truth, building the surface of something as if the surface were the whole thing. And the surface was beautiful. It really was. And then one night at dinner, it cracked right down the middle, and we spent the next 7 years pretending to ourselves that we'd repaired it. The thing about that moment at the table is that it didn't happen only once. That's what I mean when I say it followed me. It kept happening. Not the literal event. Vera never said anything like that again, not in those words, but the feeling of it. The particular feeling of having given something real and having someone draw a circle that put you outside of it. That feeling I knew from before, from long before. My third summer out of school, I worked for a man named Delmont, who ran a paving company in our county. Good money for that age. I was the only young black man on his crew, which I was used to by then, which I'd been navigating my whole working life. This business of being useful and present and indispensable in rooms where you were the only one who looked like you. Delmont respected my work, told me so directly, called me by my name, which some of the others didn't. When the weather was bad and there wasn't enough work, I was always the last to be sent home. That meant something. One afternoon, there was a disagreement on the site. Details don't matter now. What matters is that I was right, and another man, older, white, from a family that had been in the county forever, was wrong, and I said so. Not aggressively, just accurately. Delmont sided with the other man, not because he thought the other man was right. I could see in his face that he knew he wasn't, but because there are social arrangements that feel more important in a given moment than the truth. And I was on the wrong side of one of those arrangements. She's not your daughter. Don't correct her. The circumstances were completely different. The stakes were different. The people were different. But the shape of it, the shape of being told that your correctness doesn't count because of who you are in the particular equation of a particular room. I knew that shape. I had always known it. I carried it from the paving company to that dining room table, and I carry it still, late at night, when the street goes quiet and the refrigerator hums. I think that's part of why I couldn't let it go the way I might have otherwise, because it wasn't only what Vera said. It was everything that had a similar shape to what Vera said. It was decades of swallowing and adjusting and making yourself smaller so as not to threaten the comfort of people around you. And then, one night, at a candlelit table in the house you'd been filling with your labor for 7 years, your wife says it without even looking at you, and it becomes the thing that was always said, the thing you always heard under the other things people said to you, the thing you pretended not to hear so that your life could function. I don't blame Vera entirely. I don't think she meant it as all the things it was. I think she said it out of habit, out of reflex, out of the particular anxiety of a mother watching someone correct her child. I think the racial dimension of it, if there was one, and I have never been fully sure, I don't think it was conscious. Vera was not a woman with hatred in her, but you don't have to have hatred in you to wound someone. You just have to not think very hard about who they are. I wrote him back eventually. June of the following year, I wrote 3 drafts. The first 2 I threw away because they were full of explanation, and explanation is just justification with better posture. The third one was short. I said I was sorry. I said I didn't have a good explanation for why I hadn't been more present, because the real reason was shameful to me, and I'd been avoiding the shame. I said I wanted to be something better for him going forward if he'd let me. I said I loved him, which was true, and which I had not said nearly enough times in his life up to that point. He wrote back. 1 paragraph. He said, okay. Not forgiveness, not absolution, just okay. Which was probably the most honest thing he could have said, which was probably what I deserved. We talked more after that, more regularly, And I went to Baltimore twice in the next few years, and those visits were, I don't want to over-dramatize them. They were careful, two people learning to be in the same room without the history between them going sharp. He was 21 by then, 22, already becoming the man he was going to be. And I felt in those visits the weight of all the years I'd missed seeing it happen. You can't get those years back. You can add new ones, but the old ones stay missing. Jerome knows that, and I know that, and we have never spoken about it directly, and I don't know if we ever will. He has 2 children, a girl named Amara, who is 9, and a boy named Darius, who is 6. I've met them, twice, as I said, and Amara in particular has a way of looking at you that is entirely her father's. Direct, slightly appraising, like she's deciding something. I sat across from her at a table in Jerome's kitchen in Atlanta, and I thought, there it is, the thing that comes through. Whatever I was, and whatever Jerome became, and whatever he gave to her, there it is in her face, the looking. I wanted to hold on to that. I'm holding on to it now, sitting here, in the dark. That little girl looking at me across the table like she's deciding something. I loved her. I want to say that too, because I've spent so much of this confession on the wound, and not enough on the love, and they were both real. I loved Vera in the particular way you love someone you come to late in life, when you've already been disappointed enough times to know that love isn't magic, isn't effortless, is instead a series of choices you make in the morning when you're tired, and in the evening when you're irritable, and in the middle of the night when something is hurting you, and you can either reach for her or turn away, and you choose, again, to reach. She made me laugh. That mattered. After a certain age, with a certain amount of living behind you, the people who can make you laugh are among the most precious things there are. She had this way of telling a story where she'd get to the end and then circle back to add one more detail she'd forgotten. And that detail was always the funniest part. She kept plants the way other people kept children, talked to them, worried over them, moved them around to different windows, depending on the season. She was afraid of large birds, not small ones, not pigeons or sparrows, but anything large with a long wingspan. I never fully understood it, and I never needed to. It was just her. She got sick in her late 60s, kidney disease. It came on gradually, and then it didn't. The last 2 years were hard in the way only that particular kind of watching is hard. Watching someone you love get reduced slowly by something you can't fight. I drove her to dialysis 3 times a week. I learned to cook the low-sodium things she needed. I slept badly because I was listening for her in the night, trained to any change in her breathing, any sound that meant she needed something. Diane came down from Cleveland for the last stretch. She was kind to me during that time. Something had shifted between us somewhere along the years. I don't know exactly when. She called me by my name and meant it warmly. She brought food she knew Vera liked. She and I would sit in the hospital waiting rooms together, and sometimes we talked, and sometimes we just sat, and both were fine. Keisha came too. Near the end, I saw her in the hallway of that hospital, and she looked at me, and I looked at her, and we were both too tired and too sad to do anything with whatever was still between us. So we just nodded, and she went in to sit with her mother, and I went to get coffee from the machine at the end of the hall, and stood there with the cup in my hand, looking at nothing for a while. Vera died on a Tuesday in February. The light in the room was grey. She had been unconscious for 2 days before it, and when it finally happened, It was so quiet that at first I wasn't sure. The nurse came in and confirmed it with a gentleness that I will not forget. I held Vera's hand for a long time after. I want to tell you that at that moment, all the grief I had was clean. I want to tell you there was nothing complicated in it. But that would be dishonest, and the whole point of this is honesty. The grief was mostly clean, mostly just a man losing a woman he loved, which is one of the oldest pains there is. But there was something else in there too, small and shameful. A question I couldn't stop. Did she ever fully understand what she took from me that night? Did she know how long I carried it? Did she carry any of it herself? I'll never know. The dead take their knowing with them, and that's the end of it. I want to go back to the morning after the dinner, because I don't think I've said enough about it. I keep glossing over it like it was quick and simple, and it wasn't. It was one of the slowest mornings I've ever lived through. 5 in the morning. Coffee. The backyard going from black to grey. I sat there long enough that the coffee went cold, and I didn't notice until I took a second sip, and by then it didn't matter. I wasn't drinking the coffee for the coffee. I was drinking it to have something to do with my hands, something to look at, some reason to stay at that table while I figured out what kind of man I was going to be that day and the day after. What I kept coming back to was not the anger. The anger had been there the night before, lying flat under the surface while I smiled at Gerald and ate the pie and helped clear the dishes. The anger was familiar territory. I knew how to manage anger. What I kept coming back to that morning was something quieter and more damaging than anger. It was the recognition that I had known somewhere for longer than I wanted to admit that this was how I was held in that house. Not unwelcome, not disliked, but conditional. Present on the condition of my usefulness, belonging on the condition of my provision. The love, and I do believe Vera loved me, I don't doubt that, but the love had a qualifier in it that I'd been refusing to see, because seeing it would have meant deciding what to do about it, and I wasn't ready to decide. I thought about a Sunday afternoon, maybe 2 years into living with Vera, when we'd had a good day. One of those low-key, perfect days that, while you're in them, are one of the good ones. We'd gone to the farmer's market in the morning, and she'd bought flowers she couldn't really afford, and I hadn't said anything about that, because she looked so happy carrying them. We'd cooked together in the afternoon, this big unnecessary meal for just the two of us, and drunk wine and talked and laughed, and the sun was going down through the kitchen window, turning everything golden the way it does in fall. And I'd looked at her standing at the stove, stirring something, not looking at me, just at ease, just fully herself, and I'd thought, this is the thing. This is the actual thing I wanted. Not a big life, not a famous life, just this woman at this stove, on this Sunday. I held that memory at the kitchen table Saturday morning, and I let it be true, and I let the other thing be true at the same time, the Sunday and the dinner. Her at the stove with the flowers, and her at the table with those words. Both true, both her. That's the thing about people. They are all the things they are simultaneously, and loving them means loving into that, means knowing that the person who gives you the best Sunday of your life is the same person who can diminish you at a dinner table without fully understanding what they're doing. I knew all that. I sat there with my cold coffee, and I knew all that. And I still did what I did. Because knowing the complexity of a person doesn't obligate you to absorb everything they do to you. Understanding Why someone hurt you doesn't mean you have to act like they didn't. I drove to the bank. I want to tell you something about that drive. It was cold and it was early, and the roads were quiet, and I had the window down a little because I needed the air on my face. The radio was off. I just drove. Past the church we sometimes went to. Vera was more regular about it than I was. She'd been raised in the church in a way that had settled into her bones, whereas I'd been raised in it and grown out of it, and grown back into a kind of uncertain proximity to it. Not inside and not outside, but standing near the door. Past the school where Jerome had never gone because he grew up in Baltimore. Past the concrete supply yard that I'd driven past 10,000 times. Everything looked the same as it always looked and felt completely different because I was a man driving toward a decision, and the world feels different when you're inside a moment that's going to matter. I thought about my father on that drive. He had worked at the mill for 31 years. 31 years of the same building, the same machines, the same walk-in and walk-out, and he never complained about it in my hearing. Not once. He provided. That was his entire concept of what a man was supposed to be. A source, something that flows outward, that covers the needs of the people in his vicinity, that does not run dry. Whether that source was honored or understood or acknowledged was not really part of the calculation. You gave because you were supposed to give. Full stop. I had thought for a long time that I agreed with that there was nobility in providing without needing recognition. And sitting at that table the night before, I had understood for the first time that I didn't agree with it at all, that I had simply been performing an agreement I'd never fully made, that underneath the performance there was a man who needed, like all human beings need, to know that his presence in the room was real. Not just his money, not just his labor. Him, the man. She's not your daughter, don't correct her. 8 words that said, the money is welcome, the man is not. My father would have driven to work that morning, would have let it pass, would have swallowed it down with the cold coffee and gone on providing. And maybe that was the better way. Maybe the dignity in that kind of endurance is something I failed to fully understand until it was too late to choose it. But maybe it isn't endurance at all. Maybe it's just another kind of silence, the kind that looks like strength from the outside, but is just a very deep hole you learn to live at the bottom of. I parked the car at the bank, sat there for a minute. The bank wasn't open yet, and I'd known it wasn't open yet, but I'd needed to drive, needed to be in motion, so I sat in the parking lot and waited and watched the sky get lighter. A man came out of the donut shop across the street carrying a coffee cup, and he looked across at me for a moment, just someone sitting in a car in a bank parking lot on a cold Saturday morning. And I wonder sometimes what I looked like to him, whether you could see anything on my face, whether I looked like a man at the edge of something, or whether I looked like any other man waiting for a bank to open. When the doors unlocked, I went in, and I did what I did. The woman at the counter knew me. Small town. Everybody knew you at their small town bank. And she was pleasant and professional and did not ask me why I was doing what I was doing, which I appreciated. When I left, I sat in the car again for a moment. I expected to feel something decisive, something like the feeling you get when you've put down a heavy thing you were carrying too long. I felt something, but it was harder to name than that. More mixed, relief and grief in the same cup, which is how most real decisions feel if you're honest about them. Then I drove home and had the rest of the morning to get through. I have a son. I should tell you about my son. I've been talking around him, and I don't know exactly why, except that he's the part that hurts in a different way. Jerome. He's 46 now. My son from before, from a relationship in my late 20s that didn't last. His mother, Renata, was a fierce woman, brilliant, the kind of brilliant that made her impatient with everyone, including herself. We were too similar in some ways and too different in others. We fought. Not violently, never that, but loudly and frequently. And eventually, the loudness hollowed us out. She took Jerome to her mother's in Baltimore when he was 3. I was not a good father during those years. I want to say that plainly, because I've spent years trying to say it exactly as it is, without softening it with circumstances, and without making it harder than it is. I provided money. I called when I said I would call, most of the time. I visited twice a year. I never disappeared entirely. But I was not present in the daily way that a child needs. I told myself the distance made it impossible. The distance made it harder. That's true, but it didn't make it impossible. I made choices in those years, in my 30s mostly, that put other things before Jerome. Work. A woman I was with for a while. My own comfort, if I'm honest. My own comfort a lot of the time. Jerome grew up knowing I existed, but not knowing me. That's the most accurate way I can put it. He grew up with a version of me that showed up occasionally, smelling like unfamiliar soap, bearing gifts that felt more like apologies than presents, and then leaving again. His mother did not speak badly of me. I'll give Renata that. She never poisoned the well. But she also didn't supplement what I wasn't giving, couldn't do that for him, couldn't tell him how it felt to have his father there, because I wasn't there for her to know. When Jerome was about 15, he wrote me a letter, handwritten. This was before everyone did everything by computer, when people still wrote things out by hand, and that meant something about how seriously they meant it. I still have that letter. It's in a box somewhere in the closet, in a manila envelope with his return address on it. His grandmother's house in Baltimore, the handwriting already showing the man he was going to be, careful and straight across the page. He said he needed to know something. He said he needed to know whether I was his father, because I wanted to be, or because I was supposed to be. He said there was a difference, and he was old enough to feel the difference, and he wanted to know which one was true. I didn't answer the letter, not for 6 months. 6 months I kept it on my desk, moving it from under things and back under things, and the guilt of not answering it became its own additional reason not to answer it, the way those things compound. By the time I answered it, by the time I wrote back, something had solidified in him. He was polite when we talked after that, but there was a glass wall. He'd done the math and come to a conclusion, and you couldn't blame him. We have a relationship now, strained, but real. He has a family, a wife, 2 kids, a house in Atlanta. He calls me on my birthday and on Father's Day and on Christmas, regular as clockwork. And in those calls, there is genuine warmth. But there is also the glass wall, and probably always will be. We don't talk about the letter. We've never talked about the letter. I sometimes think about writing him another one now, saying, I got it. I got your question. The answer is both and neither, and something I don't have words for. But I never do. My mother always said, the worst words are the ones you swallow, not the ones you say wrong, not the ones that come out harsher than you meant, the ones you swallow, because those are the ones that stay in you and rot. I have swallowed so many words. My whole life is partly a history of swallowed words. That dinner, that table, That moment when Vera said what she said, and I reached for my water glass instead of my voice. Jerome's letter sitting on my desk for 6 months. Delmont's site where I was right and said so, and then said nothing more when the truth didn't matter. My father, whom I never asked the real questions. Celestine, who left and who I let leave, without ever once saying clearly what I wanted. I don't know if that's a character flaw or a survival strategy, or just what it is to be the kind of man I became in the particular life I lived. Probably all three. Probably it was useful and harmful simultaneously, the way most things you carry for a long time tend to be. Keisha's daughter, Vera's granddaughter, this little girl who's about 10 or 11 now, if my math is right. I've never met her. I've seen pictures, because Diane sometimes shows me things on her phone when we talk, and she's beautiful, looks like Vera around the eyes. Something about that gets me. The way Vera went on through these children and children's children, the way she continues in faces I'll probably never know well. I think about what Keisha tells her daughter about me. Probably nothing. Probably I'm just a man who was there for a while and then wasn't. A man whose name she might not even know. Maybe that's right. Maybe that's the correct size for the space I actually occupied in that family story. But I think about the Honda. I think about the application fees. I think about the way I used to sit at the kitchen table some mornings, and Keisha would come down for coffee before school, before university, and we'd have these short, careful conversations about nothing important, the weather, something on the news, and I wanted so badly for it to be normal, for it to be the ordinary thing it looked like from the outside. A man and a young woman sharing a quiet morning in the same house. I wanted to be useful to her in a way that didn't feel like an intrusion. I wanted her to feel that having me there had cost her nothing. I wonder sometimes if that wanting was too quiet. If I should have said it out loud. I am not trying to replace anything. I am not pretending a history we don't have. I'm just a man who wants things to go well for you. Would it have helped, hearing it plainly? Or would it have embarrassed her, or embarrassed me? We'll never know. That's another door that's been locked a long time. It's later now. I can feel it getting later. The way the body knows time, even when the room doesn't change. I'm tired, but not the sleepy kind, just the used kind. The way you feel after you've been carrying something a long way, and you set it down for a moment, but your shoulders still remember the weight. I've lived long enough to understand that there is no clean version of a life, that every story you tell about yourself leaves out something true and includes something that is true but also convenient. I've told this story in different ways to different people, or not told it, kept it inside, which is its own kind of telling. I've told the version where I was dignified and wronged. I've told the version where I was stubborn and petty. Both are true. The man who quietly withdrew everything he'd been providing was both of those men at the same time, and probably our third man I haven't found words for yet. Vera is gone. Keisha is a stranger. Jerome calls me on my birthday. That's the ledger, more or less. That's what the choices added up to. And yet, and I want to say this because I don't want you to leave here thinking I'm only grief and regret. And yet there was goodness too. Real goodness. The years Vera and I had before everything complicated itself. The way the house felt on Sunday mornings when she cooked and I did the crossword, and the light came in through the east window. Jerome's 2 kids, whom I've met twice, but who are alive in the world and have good faces. My crew, Those 3 men I worked beside for years, who trusted me, who showed up and did good work, and shook my hand at the end of every week. The concrete I poured, which is in the ground all over this county, and will be there when I'm gone. There is something about knowing that the work you did is still in the earth, that the earth is holding something you made. My mother is buried out past the county line, in the church cemetery, where her parents are buried too. I go out there every year on her birthday, not her death day, her birthday, because she always said death days are for the dead and birthdays are for the living. I sit on the bench near her stone and I talk to her, out loud, which I know probably looks strange to anyone passing. I tell her things I didn't say while she was alive, things I've figured out, things I'm still figuring out. I told her about Vera. I told her about what Vera said at the table. I told her about Jerome's letter. I told her I had swallowed a lot of words, and I thought she'd understand, she being her, and that I was trying to do better with the ones I had left. The last time I was out there, maybe 2 months ago, maybe 3, it was late October. Cold, but not yet the hard cold. The leaves were down. I sat on that bench for a long time, and I didn't say anything, just sat, and I thought about how strange it is to be old, how you carry all these versions of yourself, the young man, the prideful man, the man at the table, the man in the bank, the man reading the letter and not answering, and none of them are gone, exactly. They're all still in there. They're all still you, and some mornings you wake up and you're not sure which one of them is going to be in charge of the day. I'm 71. I didn't expect to be 71. Not in the sense that I expected to die young, but in the sense that 71 always seemed like something other people were. Older people, the people whose hands had spots on them. And now my hands have spots on them, and I look at them sometimes like they belong to someone I should know better than I do. Vera died on a Tuesday in February. The light in the room was grey. She had been unconscious for 2 days before it, and when it finally happened, it was so quiet that at first I wasn't sure. The nurse came in and confirmed it with a gentleness that I will not forget. I held Vera's hand for a long time after. I want to tell you that at that moment, all the grief I had was clean. I want to tell you there was nothing complicated in it, but that would be dishonest. And the whole point of this is honesty. The grief was mostly clean, mostly just a man losing a woman he loved, which is one of the oldest pains there is. But there was something else in there too, small and shameful, a question I couldn't stop. Did she ever fully understand what she took from me that night? Did she know how long I carried it? Did she carry any of it herself? I'll never know. The dead take their knowing with them, and that's the end of it. The weeks after were strange. People bring food, which is both overwhelming and deeply correct. There is something right about that instinct, about saying, let me at least make sure your body is fed while your spirit handles the rest. Diane called every day for the first 2 weeks. Gerald came down for the service and shook my hand for a long time, the way men do when they can't find the words. He has some words, Gerald, more than I gave him credit for in the early years. He said to me, outside the church, that Vera always spoke highly of me, that she was proud of what we'd built together. He said she told Diane once that I was one of the most decent men she'd ever known. I held on to that. I still hold on to it. Not because it answered the question. It didn't answer the question. But because it was something true from someone who had no reason to say it, unless it was true. She was proud of what we'd built together. I've turned that over. Built together. Not built for her. built together. That's a particular kind of recognition, the kind that includes both people in the making of a thing. Maybe she did see it. Maybe the seeing was always there, and what was missing was just the saying, just the actual words said in the actual room at the actual time. We were both people who didn't say things when we should have. Maybe that was the central fact of us. Maybe that was why we found each other, and why we hurt each other, and why we stayed. After the service, after everyone had gone, I went back to the house and I sat in the kitchen. And it was so quiet, it was almost a sound. The plants were still there, all of them, in their different windows, angled toward whatever light they needed. I didn't know how to take care of plants the way she did. I knew she talked to them. I stood there for a while, and then, feeling somewhat ridiculous, I said something out loud to the one on the windowsill above the sink, the big one with the wide leaves she'd had for years. I said something like, "She's gone now, so we're going to have to work this out between us." I kept that plant alive for a year and a half, more than I expected of myself. Eventually, it died, and I felt bad about it in a proportion that was probably not really about the plant. I threw it out in the early spring and bought a new one from the grocery store, and it didn't last 2 months. I stopped trying after that. The windowsill is empty now, and has been for a while, and some mornings I notice it, and some mornings I don't. There is a man in my neighborhood, Earl, who is in his mid-80s, and who has been alone for most of his adult life. He never married, has some family out of state who calls, I gather, but day to day, he is just Earl and his house and his one particular walk he takes every morning around the same 4 blocks. I see him sometimes when I'm out early. We nod. Sometimes say a word or two about the weather, about a house that's changed, about nothing in particular. He seems content, or at least not discontent. There's a difference. I used to wonder about men like Earl when I was younger, whether they were lonely in ways they didn't show, or whether the quiet life was genuinely sufficient for them, whether they'd simply arranged their interior worlds to not need what I needed. Now I'm closer to understanding. Now I think there are just different architectures of a life, and none of them is complete, and all of them are partial answers to the question of how to be a person in the world without being destroyed by it. My answer involved giving and having the giving clarified, and then adjusting the arrangement. Earl's answer is a morning walk around the same 4 blocks. Jerome's answer, whatever it is, involves keeping the glass wall up, but calling on birthdays. Keisha's answer apparently doesn't include me at all, and maybe that's right for her. Maybe I'm a category she doesn't need to have a feeling about. My mother's answer was God and work, and speaking plainly, and not one of those things has been straightforwardly available to me in the way they were to her. I envy her the clarity. I envy her the church that actually held her. I envy her the plain speaking, which she did so well, and which I inherited only in pieces, only the private version, only the version that happens in empty kitchens and late-night chairs and at gravestones in October. If I could go back to that table, that's the question I keep starting and can never quite finish. If I could go back to that table, I don't think I would do what most people would imagine. I don't think I would give a speech. I don't think I would stand up and make an accounting of everything I'd given and demand recognition. That's not who I was, and it's not who I would want to have been. But I think I would have looked at Vera, not past her, at her directly. And I think I would have said, quietly, in a voice nobody else at the table needed to hear, You need to think about what you just said to me. That's all. Just that. You need to think about what you just said to me. Not because it would have fixed anything. Not because it would have led to a real conversation. Right there, with the pie still warm, and Diane looking at her husband and Gerald looking at his food. But because I would have known I said it. Because she would have known I'd heard her. Because there is something in naming a thing. Not loudly, not dramatically, just naming it, that keeps it from owning you entirely. I let her words own me for years. I let the silence I chose at that table become the size of the whole thing. Let it mean all the other silences. Let it become the definitive statement about who I was and what I was worth in that house. And because I never broke the silence about that specific moment, it just grew. It just became the permanent architecture of that part of my life, the ceiling I lived under without ever quite seeing. You need to think about what you just said to me. 7 words. I could have said 7 words. My mother was right about silence. She was right about which kind gives your dignity away and which kind keeps it. I think I've been confusing the two my whole life. I let her words own me for years. I let the silence I chose at that table become the size of the whole thing. Let it mean all the other silences. Let it become the definitive statement about who I was and what I was worth in that house. And because I never broke the silence about that specific moment, it just grew. It just became the permanent architecture of that part of my life, the ceiling I lived under without ever quite seeing. You need to think about what you just said to me. 7 words. I could have said 7 words. My mother was right about silence. She was right about which kind gives your dignity away and which kind keeps it. I think I've been confusing the two my whole life. I want to tell you one more thing before I run out of whatever this is, this energy, this late-night willingness to look at things directly. I don't regret removing my name from those arrangements. I have thought about it from every angle I can reach, and I still don't regret it. Not because it was clean or righteous. It wasn't entirely either of those things. But because the alternative was to pretend that what was said at the table had no meaning. To go on the next morning as if the arrangement that had been named, "She is not yours," had not, in fact, been named. To absorb that naming without response, and to keep giving, keep funding, keep ensuring, keep supporting a relationship that had just been officially defined as adjacent and exterior. That would have been a kind of slow self-erasure that I don't think I could have survived without losing something essential. What I do regret is the silence. Not the act, but the silence that surrounded it. The fact that I did it without a word, that Vera had to find out through Keisha's panic phone call rather than from me directly. That was the petty part. That was the part where I let my hurt do the talking instead of my voice. I should have come to her the morning after and said, "You drew a line last night, and I am going to honor the line. Everything that was mine is going back to being mine. I am not your daughter's father, and that has been established, and so I'm going to stop acting as though I were in the specific ways that cost me money. But I want you to know that I heard what you said, and I think you ought to know that too. Instead, I just did it, silently, and let her find out the hard way. The two silences are different. The silence at the table was fear. Fear of the public, fear of the scene, fear of knowing that if I pulled on that thread in front of everyone, it might unravel something I wasn't ready to lose. The silence the next morning was something uglier, more calculated. The silence of a man who wants to hurt without being seen hurting. And I've made my peace with having been that man in that moment. But peace is not the same as being proud of it. There's a version of this story where I was a man wronged and responded with quiet dignity. I've told myself that version. It has the shape of truth without quite being true. The truer version is that I was a man wronged who responded partly with dignity and partly with a small, cold revenge that I dressed up as principle. Both things can be true. They were both true. The dignity was real, and so was the smallness, and I was, in those 2 days, both the man I wanted to be and the man I was afraid I was. Aren't we all, most of the time? Aren't we all? The water in that glass is still there. Still cold, I imagine. Though it's been so long, it's probably room temperature now. I haven't moved much. The refrigerator is still humming. Somewhere down the block, a car went by a while ago, and then nothing. I'm going to go to bed in a little while. I'll lie down in this house that is mine now, entirely mine, the way things become entirely yours when everyone else is gone from them. I'll look at the ceiling for a while probably. I'll think about Jerome and whether to call him tomorrow, about the granddaughter with Vera's eyes that I'll probably never know, about Keisha somewhere in Columbus with her daughter and her computers and her life that moved on completely, past the man who put her first car on his insurance, about my mother who is in the ground past the county line, listening or not, understanding or not, forgiving or not. Though I think she understood, she always did. Even the parts of me I didn't show her, she seemed to know were there. That was her gift, the particular intelligence of women who have raised difficult things and loved them anyway. I think about the concrete in the ground. I think about that sometimes when I need to feel like I left something. The work is there, 30, 40 years of it, in parking lots and driveways and the foundations of buildings where people go about their days without knowing or needing to know who poured the thing they're standing on. I stood on it too. That's enough. That has to be enough. I'm tired now. I don't know how to end something like this. I'm not sure it ends. I'm not sure it's supposed to. The things that follow you don't resolve, mostly. They just become part of the particular texture of being who you are. You learn to live in the same house as them. You learn to pass them in the hallway at 2 a.m. without stopping to have the whole argument again. Most nights you can do that. She's not your daughter. Don't correct her. 7 years. Application fees. A little Honda in good working order. You need to think about what you just said to me. I didn't say it. I should sleep now. I should sleep.